History usually remembers the roar of the cannons. It remembers the generals, the conquerors, the men who drew lines on a map with the blood of thousands. But while the kings of Europe were playing chess with armies, one man in Augsburg was rewriting the rulebook of the game itself. He realized that a sword can chip and a shield can break, but a debt is eternal. We are looking at Jacob Fugger, a man who proved that you don't need a crown to rule the world, you just need the receipt. Now, let us open the archives and reveal the shadow behind the success. To understand Jacob Fugger, you have to understand the world he was born into. It was the late 15th century, a time when wealth usually meant land. If you were a duke, you owned dirt and the peasants standing on it. But land is heavy. You can't move it, and it doesn't always pay the bills when you need to hire an army next Tuesday. Jacob was the seventh son of a weaver. In the lottery of inheritance, being number 7 usually meant you got nothing but a pat on the back and a one-way ticket to the priesthood. And that is exactly where his family sent him. But Jacob wasn't interested in saving souls. He was interested in the mechanics of value. He traveled to Venice, which at the time was the Wall Street of the Renaissance. It was a city of gold, spice, and silk, but the most valuable thing Jacob found there wasn't a commodity. It was a technique. He learned double-entry bookkeeping. Now, that sounds incredibly boring. It sounds like homework. But think of it this way. Before this, business was a guessing game. You threw money out and hoped it came back. Double-entry bookkeeping was like inventing a radar system for money. It allowed Jacob to see exactly where every single copper coin was hiding, where the profit was bleeding out, and where the opportunities were sleeping. It turned business from a gamble into a science. When he returned to Germany, he didn't want to trade cotton or spices like his father. He looked at the frantic, desperate nobility of Europe and saw a market that no one else dared to touch. His first target was Archduke Sigismund of Tyrol. Sigismund was the classic rich kid with a spending problem. He lived in a castle, wore velvet, and threw parties that lasted for days, but he was completely broke. He needed cash, fast, to pay off a war he was losing. Most bankers would have run away. Lending money to a royal was dangerous. If a peasant doesn't pay you back, you break his legs. If a duke doesn't pay you back, he cuts off your head. But Fugger saw an opening. He offered the Archduke a massive loan bags of heavy silver coins delivered right when he was desperate. But in exchange, Fugger didn't ask for a promise or a handshake. He asked for the keys to the garage. Sigismund owned the Schwaz silver mines, the richest on the continent. Fugger's deal was simple. I give you cash today. I take the silver straight out of the ground tomorrow. This was the pivot point. Fugger wasn't just a lender anymore. He was a producer. He bypassed the middleman entirely. It's like lending money to a struggling tech company, but instead of asking for interest, you demand the rights to every iPhone they sell for the next 10 years. The silver flowed out of the dark mines and straight into Fugger's vaults. The Archduke got his party money, but Fugger got the asset. He realized then that the most powerful force in the world wasn't the sword that conquered the mine, but the contract that legally stole it. By the time the other merchants realized what he was doing, it was too late. Jacob Fugger had turned the aristocracy into his employees. He had realized that kings were just bad business managers with fancy hats, and he was the only one offering a bailout. But the silver mines were just the warm-up act. Jacob had tasted control And now, he wanted something bigger. He didn't just want to own the mines. He wanted to own the man who sat on the highest throne in Christendom. The year was 1519, and the CEO of Europe had just died. Maximilian I, the Holy Roman Emperor, passed away, leaving behind a massive void and a very complicated question. Who gets to run the world next? Now, unlike most monarchies where the crown just falls onto the head of the eldest son, the Holy Roman Empire was unique. It was an elected position. There were 7 electors, powerful German princes and archbishops who held the voting slips. And in 1519, these 7 men turned the fate of the continent into a private auction. 2 men stepped into the ring. In the blue corner, you had Francis I of France. He was rich, charismatic, and backed by the sheer financial muscle of the French state. In the red corner, you had Charles of Spain, the grandson of the dead emperor. For Jacob Fugger, this wasn't politics. It was a matter of survival. The French king hated him. If Francis won, Fugger's assets would be seized, his monopolies shattered, and his head likely separated from his shoulders. If Charles won, Fugger would survive, but Charles was young, inexperienced, and compared to the French king, cash poor. So, Jacob Fugger decided to do something that had never been done on this scale before. He decided to buy the election. This was the Fugger algorithm shifting into high gear. He treated the imperial crown not as a divine right, but as a distressed asset, a luxury item that could be secured if you had enough liquidity to outbid the competition. The bidding war that followed was grotesque. The 7 electors essentially sat back and opened their wallets. First, the French offered 100,000 florins. Fugger countered on behalf of Charles. The French raised it to 300,000. The price kept climbing. It was a geopolitical poker game, but the chips were real gold. And here is where the translation of complexity is vital. You see, moving that much money in the 16th century wasn't a matter of clicking send on a screen. It was a logistical nightmare. To bribe an elector in Frankfurt, you needed physical gold coins, thousands of them, packed into reinforced chests, loaded onto heavy wagons, and guarded by mercenaries as they rolled through bandit-infested forests. If the wagon didn't arrive, the vote didn't happen. Fugger didn't just have the money, he had the infrastructure. He had a network of couriers, safe houses, and private roads. While the French struggled to move their cash across hostile borders, Fugger could issue a bill of exchange, essentially a Renaissance wire transfer. He could tell his branch manager in Frankfurt to release the funds instantly upon his signature. He moved value faster than his enemies could move horses. But the price was getting dangerously high. The final tag for the throne came to nearly 853,000 florins. To give you a sense of scale, a skilled master craftsman earned about 40 florins a year. This was over 20,000 years of wages, burned in a few weeks of bribery. Fugger didn't have all of this cash sitting in a vault. He had to leverage everything. He called in favors, he drained his reserves, and he syndicated the debt, pulling in smaller investors, telling them, "Back me now, and when Charles is emperor, we will own the continent." He went all in. It was the ultimate leverage play. If Charles lost, the House of Fugger would collapse into bankruptcy and ruin. The tension in Augsburg was suffocating. Fugger sat in his study, the ledger open, waiting for news. Then, the word came. The electors had voted. the gold had done its work. Charles V was the new Holy Roman Emperor. Francis of France was furious, but he was broke. Fugger had outspent a kingdom, but the victory lap was short. Charles V was now the most powerful man on earth, ruling an empire on which the sun never set, stretching from Peru to Germany. But he was also arguably the poorest man on earth. He owed Jacob Fugger a sum of money that was mathematically impossible to pay back through normal taxes. This brings us to the most noir moment in financial history. Years later, Charles tried to wiggle out of the debt. Emperors don't like admitting they owe their power to a weaver's son. He hinted that perhaps the debt could be forgiven or delayed. He tried to pull rank. Jacob Fugger didn't panic. He didn't beg. He wrote a letter. We still have this letter today. It is a masterpiece of corporate aggression. In it, a common merchant speaks to the God-appointed emperor and says, roughly translated, "It is well known that without me, your majesty might not have acquired the imperial crown. I command you to order that the money which I have advanced, together with the interest upon it, shall be reckoned up and paid without further delay." Let that sink in. He told the man who could command armies, burn cities, and execute dukes, "I bought you. Now pay me." And the terrifying part? The emperor paid. He didn't pay in cash. Of course, he didn't have any. He paid in sovereignty. He handed over the rights to the mercury mines in Almaden and the grand masterships of the Spanish knightly orders. He essentially privatized the state's revenue streams to satisfy his creditor. Fugger had perfected the mechanism. He realized that if you lend a man $100, you have no power. But if you lend a king $10 million, you own his foreign policy. The throne was just a chair. The real power was in the ledger. There is a tragic irony to the architect of modern capitalism. He built a cage made of gold, and then he locked himself inside it. By the end of his life, Jacob Fugger was the rich. That was actually his legal nickname in the court documents. He had accumulated a fortune equivalent to roughly 2% of the entire European GDP. To put that in perspective, imagine a single man today personally owning the economy of the United Kingdom. Family members and nephews begged him to retire. They said, "Jacob, we have enough. Let's buy a castle, hunt some deer, and enjoy the sun." But Fugger refused. He famously snapped back, "I will earn while I am able." He wasn't driven by need anymore. He was driven by the mechanism he had created. He was like a shark that drowns if it stops swimming. The wars he financed were getting bloodier. The peasants were revolting, partly because of the taxes raised to pay back the loans he had issued. The Reformation was tearing Europe apart, fueled by anger against the very church corruption that Fugger had profited from. He had woven a web so complex that he was the only spider capable of navigating it. If he stopped, the web would break. But even the man who bought an emperor couldn't buy more time. In 1525, the ledger finally closed. Jacob Fugger died. He left behind no children. His legacy wasn't flesh and blood, it was a system. He left behind the proof that money is political gravity. He showed the world that a king's decree is just words, but a line of credit is reality. However, he did leave one physical trace that defies his ruthless reputation. In Augsburg, he built the Fuggerei. It is the world's oldest social housing complex. He built homes for the poor, specifically for those who had fallen on hard times but were trying to get back up. It feels like a contradiction. The man who squeezed the continent dry built a sanctuary for the destitute? Historians argue about his motives. Was it guilt? Was it a PR stunt? Or was it the ultimate insurance policy, a bribe paid to God to ensure his soul didn't end up in the red? Here is the fascinating detail. The rent for the Fugger was set at 1 Rhenish guilder per year. 500 years later, the trust he established is still running. The rent has not changed. Today, the residents of the Fugger pay less than €1 a year to live there. It is a strange, quiet memorial. While the empire of Charles V crumbled, while the Spanish gold fleet sank, and while the borders of Europe were redrawn 100 times by wars and treaties, this little neighborhood remains. The debt of the emperor is dust, but the charity of the banker endures. It suggests that Jacob Fugger understood the final lesson of capital is just energy. You can use it to burn the world down, or you can use it to keep a few families warm. But you cannot take it with you. Jacob Fugger was the first modern man. He looked at the medieval world, a world of honor, bloodlines, and divine rights, and he dismantled it with a balance sheet. He taught us that the true history of the world isn't written on the battlefield. It is written in the back room, in the quiet scratching of a quill against paper, where the terms are set and the interest is calculated. We are still living in the world he financed. Every time a government borrows money to build a tank, every time a lobbyist buys a law, and every time a nation's policy is dictated by its credit rating, we are seeing the ghost of the weaver's son from Augsburg. He showed us that power has a price tag, but he also showed us that once you buy the world, you are forever responsible for its debts. Now, let us close the archives. The ink is dry, the vault is locked, and the interest has accrued. Because in the ledger of history, every debt must eventually be paid.